Time to introduce you to a dear friend of mine, a colleague within the Faculty of Education, Professor Peter Mayo, who will share some reflections with us titled The Significance of the Two September 11th. Peter.
15 minutes, right? 15 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sinia, for putting together this wonderful event, and your colleagues. You've been very, very meticulous in this regard, as I know, and it's great because I think there's a need for this in Malta. I experienced a previous event. Now, I also feel a bit uneasy when I talk about a country which I never visited. I've been to Latin America, Mexico, and I've only read about or learned about when I lived, especially in Canada, mixing with Chileans. So they will give me all kinds of inside stories, and some people in Malta too. I remember Father Alfred, Valletta, who was there in the Pinochet regime. I have to be careful, because you yourself are a Chilean, you should be sitting here and speaking about it. I know Don Milan used to say, mai insegnare la Cina ai cinesi. So I tackle this with a bit of humility. There's a limit to what I know about this subject. Well, there's a limit to what I know about everything, but now, this occurred on the 11th September 1973. At that time, I was just finishing my sixth form. And I was very non-political. I knew nothing about politics. I wasn't even interested in politics. I only spoke about football at the time, quite honestly. My politicization came in later, working for a Libyan finance newspaper. And this was significant, and later when I studied sociology. At the time I knew nothing, but I never forget opening the Times, front page, Reuters, with every day in September about what was happening in Chile. And this captured my imagination, somehow. I remember, now, I'm trying to trust my memory here, one of the analyses which was produced by Reuters was, why did this happen? And I remember very much this typical common sense sweeping statement, because his experiment, Allende's, of socialism failed. Failed, typical. So it was almost justification. Then I entered the field of journalism with a small j, of course, was a part-time work to get some pocket money, practically, working for the center. And I have to say, at the time we had a Labour government, in its second year, 71, and the General Workers' Union was very active. And I recall, we used to print our newspaper, the General Workers' Union, Union Print. I recall an exhibition about Allende and the coup d'etat inside the entrance of the General Workers' Union. And then there were activities. Now, I'm not going to speak more about it. There was a lot of awareness about this at the time. Because there are people here in the audience, I know, who were even part of the organization here. Okay, so, it wasn't as, people were not as passive. There was a bit of an awareness, especially on the socialist side, about what happened. Then, of course, later on, with my contacts in Chile, with Chilean friends, etc., and I read a lot about it, then I became very politicized, especially when I was studying sociology a bit later. What is significant for me is, first of all, I want to make a change, and I told Sinia this. I'm not going to speak about the 1st September 11 only. In the time permitting, I am also going to speak about the 2nd September 11, or actually, like today, September 12th. Come on, one day. But if a coup d'etat doesn't take place, if it takes place on the 12th, postponed for the 11th, right? I mean, there's some planning, etc. We can talk about 2 Septembers 11, which were very similar in orientation, in its goals, in its purpose, preceding the United States one. Right, which everybody's been talking about. You had Chile, 1923, and wait for it, September 12, 1980, you had Turkey. For what reason? To accelerate the process of neoliberalization, in the case of Turkey. In Chile was to introduce neoliberalization, because in Chile, you had a group of people who were sent to Chicago from the Ministry of Development and Planning. They became known as the Chicago Boys, must be baptized, battizzata as they say in Italian, this must be branded by Americans, it must be an American title, Chicago Boys, who were under the influence of
Friedman.
Milton Friedman and Arnold Harberge, but Milton Friedman in particular. And this had been there as a plan. For some reason, Chile was seen as the perfect laboratory for this kind of trial run. What today we call neoliberalism. Now, I stand to be corrected, but at the time, we didn't speak of neoliberalism. We spoke about the market. We spoke about, actually later, Margaret Thatcher, when she turned this trial run together with Ronald Reagan into a global process, and successfully so. We never used the word neoliberalism. We used the word Thatcherism, which is more than just neoliberalism as we had in Turkey, for example, because it also implied liberalization of the economy, moving back the controls of state, individualizing people, not collectivities. Now this is all in contrast to Allende. Allende nationalized. He wanted to nationalize the copper industry. Big issue. Okay? That was probably his death warrant there. Okay? He spoke about collectivity. As you know, in Latin America, el concepto del pueblo. You know, you see pictures of Allende, very theatrical, like a populist, no? Looking at the bird, you know? Somebody said, like, Castro's like him. No, Castro's different. Castro does this when he makes a point. But, you know, Allende was this, el pueblo. Pueblo in Spanish has different meanings. In Spain, pueblo also means village. I don't know if it's also in Chile, but in Spain it also means village. But it also means the collective, the sense of a people, of a socialist people, you know, a socialist program. The neoliberals talk about individualization. We are consumers, etc. This was all new at the time. When it became global, people started using the word Thatcherism. Actually, we must give credit here to a person who passed away this year. That was Stuart Hall, who actually coined the term Thatcherism. This is documented. So it was Stuart who did that, Stuart Hall. We spoke about Reaganomics at the time. Then we start talking about neoliberalism. It wasn't there. That was this then. In 1980, we had Turkey. What it represented in Chile was the end of one of the longest democracies in the region. Chile had a strong parliamentary democratic tradition, one of the longest in the region. The policies of the Chicago Boys implemented against the background of fascist terror. So for me, what September 11th, the 11 September means, the first, what also the 12th September in Turkey means, and the aftermath of the Twin Towers it means the violent streak which many people saw as being always part and parcel of capitalism. Capitalism has this violent dimension. So it is at the level of consent, but also at the level of repression. And what I call this is, I wrote a chapter about the two September 11s in my book, Politics of Indignation. I called it From a Blues Number. I called it Born Under a Bad Sign. This is how neoliberalism was born. It's a famous song by Robert Johnson, I believe, rendered famous by Cream. So I got it. And you have the violent birth pangs of neoliberalism. What happened there was also that Latin America is an informal colony of the United States. And the United States will always use any excuse to intervene as a result of the Monroe Doctrine. That Monroe Doctrine is meant, supposedly, to protect United States security. Haven't we heard that word today? And listen to this. It's not just military security and economic interests. Here's the basis of what we call the military-industrial complex. And they're going in the region. So it was a trial run from neoliberalism, a process of national. So when somebody nationalizes, when somebody talks about the collective, he becomes the Antichrist in that context. He's public enemy number one. And of course, Castro would always say, Castro is on record saying, that he was too naive in the sense that he wanted to go, everything had to pass through the parliamentary process. You couldn't have found a more democratic person than Allende. in this respect, who I believe also had a coalition government at the time. And everything had to pass through. Castro said he should have, he told him when he went to and gave a famous speech at Valparaiso, which is the birthplace of Allende, incidentally, he said, consolidate your gains, which he didn't. Anyway, yeah. So for me, these three elements, you have Chile, Turkey, United States. The violence of neoliberalism. That's a violent process. It's a violent colonial process. We've seen this in the implementation of the first two cases, Chile and Turkey. And we've also seen it in the reaction, because neoliberalization creates a reaction, and the reaction doesn't come only from progressive forces. It doesn't come from the World Social Forum, but it also comes from Al-Qaeda, for example. Now, I'm not going to go into conspiracy theories, whether that was an in job or not. I'm not going to go into that. And, worst of all, the violence of the counteraction by the United States. Let's not forget, the Twin Towers and the attack on the Pentagon then led to a carte blanche for the United States and its allies globally. This is another form of globalization, on the pretext of the war against terror, under the banner of the war against terror, to impinge on all kinds of civil liberties, to engage in all kinds of enhanced interrogation techniques, using satellite states like Egypt under Mubarak at the time, as the place where these enhanced interrogation techniques were implemented. So it was a continuation of the kind of extra economic conditions, repressive ones, to continue to implement neoliberalization. And I finally conclude by saying, what are the effects today? Luckily, these are still being contested. Let's take the two cases, Chile and Turkey. Chile, we've had student protests. Now this is after Pinochet was out of office, before he actually died, after Bachelet and other people. We still have the legacies of those neoliberal policies. Believe me, I mean, to have students in the streets protest, because to send your child to a state school also means that you have to also become a consumer. You have to pay. Now, we already have problems everywhere where, you know, like you have an element of choice, which is a farce. You either pay or you're fobbed off with a second-class program in certain countries. Okay? Now, I'm concluding. Now, you have a case in Chile as a result of the Pinochet legacy, right? Can be traced back to Pinochet, where even to send your child to a state school, you have to pay. And we had students out and creating alliances with the Central Única de Trabajadores, etc. So there's a good alliance there. Turkey, the New Right Alliance, which Pinochet represented, with his bigoted Christian politics, where you have economic liberalization but conservative values. Margaret Thatcher was a classic example. Victorian values alongside economic liberalization. In Turkey, you didn't have that, because in Turkey you had an army which represented secularization. That was one of the but that's a different discussion now. We need more time for that. This one. In Turkey, now you have that. With Erdogan, you have that, because now you have the continuation of neoliberal policies and conservative Islamic values. But it's being resisted. We've seen Gezi Park, the protests in Gezi Park in Istanbul, and the reaction turned out. We've also seen, as a result of the coup d'etat, a replica of what happened in the dirty war in Argentina as a result, the Madres movement. Turkey has a Madres movement which meets every Saturday at Galatasaray Park, where Galatasaray High School is, from where the famous football team came, every Saturday assiduously protesting about the disappeared in Turkey, Argentina style, without one thing though. Their children, when the women didn't give birth to children, then they killed them. The children belonged to their families. In Argentina, no, the children were given to members and affiliates. And just now, the Madras movement had a very important victory a few weeks ago.
Thank you.
So, there's a lot to say about this. It's great that we remember these first two September 11th, Chile and Turkey. Thanks.
Thank you.